In the next series of lectures, I want to introduce you to a number of different so-called voting paradoxes. And these are just situations in which one or another of the voting methods that we've been introduced to produces a result that seems counterintuitive or undesirable in one way or another. But before we start discussing these different paradoxes, I want to spend a few minutes to discuss my motivation. Why am I interested in discussing or looking at these different voting paradoxes? Well, an immediate answer is just that they raise interesting conceptual and mathematical issues that just cry out for a deeper analysis or a more detailed mathematical analysis. But in this lecture, I want to explore a different answer to that question. And that's to first of all note that there are many, many different types of voting methods. Here is a list of some of the methods that we've talked about, together with, I've thrown in here some other methods that we haven't talked about yet, and this list is not exhausted. I certainly haven't listed all of the voting methods out there. So a natural question is, which method is best? Which method should I use for my next election? How can we go about comparing these different voting methods? Well, to compare the different voting methods, there's different ways we can go about it, different considerations, different issues that we could think about. The first are pragmatic considerations. Is the procedure easy to use? Is it legal? Your society might have a constitution that explicitly rules out certain types of voting methods. The importance of ease of use really should not be underestimated. Plurality rule has many, many undesirable properties, as we'll see. We'll see lots of problems with the plurality rule. But despite that fact, it remains one of the most common voting methods. But the reason, it's not hard to figure out why that's the case. Plurality rule is very simple. It's easy to implement. All the voters just have to select one of the candidates. It's completely transparent how the profile of votes is turned into is used to select the winner. The winner with the most votes wins. So it's completely transparent. It's easy to use. And that's a lot of reasons why people like plurality rule. There's another type or group of considerations that we can take into account. These are so-called behavioral considerations. And this is really empirical data you have about the members of your society. Now, it might be that just because of who the people are in your group, just various empirical facts about them, that it's not actually going to matter which voting method you actually use, because all of the methods will actually lead to select the same winner, given the preferences that everybody in your society has. So if you had some way of measuring the preferences or making assumptions about the preferences of all of the voters in your society, and it would turn out that based on those assumptions, all the voting methods actually would end up selecting the same candidate, then there's no reason to really worry about the different paradoxes that these voting methods actually satisfy. You can just select the method that's most natural or easiest to use for your decision-making problem. A third type of consideration: what is the information that the voting method requires from the voters? So some of the voting methods require the voters to just select one of the candidates. Other methods ask the voters to rank all of the candidates. Still, there's other methods that ask the voters to express something about their intensity of preference. So you could go about comparing the different voting methods in terms of the information that it requires from the voters' overall opinion about the different candidates. And finally, there's axiomatics. Can we characterize the different voting methods in terms of normative principles of group decision-making? And this is really the approach that leads us to consider or to explore these different voting paradoxes. What we mean by a voting paradox is simply that there's a situation in which we can show that a particular voting method doesn't actually satisfy some natural principle of group decision making. So let me take a few minutes just to give you kind of a general overview of some of the principles of group decision making that we'll discuss. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about these, and this list is not meant to be exhaustive, but I just wanted to give you a sampling of some of these principles of group decision making. So the first is one that we've already seen, namely the Condorcet Condition. This is just the principle that says if a Condorcet winner exists, then that winner should be elected. So this principle says, in effect, just you must use a Condorcet consistent voting method. Here's another principle, unanimity, or the Pareto Condition. This says that if everybody in your society prefers candidate A over candidate B. So that's a strict preference of candidate A over candidate B, meaning that if they were forced to rank those two candidates, they would all rank candidate A above candidate B. If that's the case, then B definitely should not win the election. I don't have enough information to determine whether or not A should win the election. There may be other candidates that are ranked higher than A, but at least I know that B should not win the election. Why? Well, because it's unanimous that everybody prefers candidate A, another candidate, namely A, over B. Another condition is anonymity. Anonymity says that the names of the voters do not matter. So what that means is the names or the identity of the voters don't matter. So what that means is that if all of the voters would swap their votes, then that should not actually affect the outcome of the election. So whoever wins the election, it should not be sensitive to which of the identity of the voters, which voters selected or voted for which candidates. Another natural condition is monotonicity. And what monotonicity says is that a candidate receiving more support shouldn't ever make her worse off. So I need to specify a bit more about what more support actually means. But intuitively, imagine two election situations. One in which candidate A is ranked above candidate B by a group of voters, and another in which candidate B is actually ranked above candidate A. So in the second situation, B improves, there's more support for candidate B in the second election. So if candidate B actually already won the first election, it certainly should be the case that candidate B wins the second election as well, because more people have a better opinion of that candidate in that second election. So that's the monotonicity condition. Another condition is independence, or another principle is independence. This says that the winner of the election should not depend on irrelevant spoiler candidates. So whoever is elected, a head-to-head contest between one candidate A versus another candidate B, it should not matter what everybody else thinks about this irrelevant spoiler candidate C. And finally, there's universal domain. And what universal domain says is that the voters are simply free to select whatever vote they want, whatever ballot they want. They're free to rank the candidates however they want. There's no reason why they're not allowed to select one particular ranking. So these are a number of principles. It's not an exhaustive list, but there are a number of natural normative principles of group decision making. And what we're going to see is that some of the voting methods satisfy some of these principles, and other voting methods, there are some principles that some voting methods don't actually satisfy. And this will give rise to what's known as voting paradox.